In this video, we introduced New Testament textual criticism, along with a number of terms and tools that will be essential for you to know to be able to practice New Testament textual criticism. So when we're thinking about textual criticism generally, I want to start by distinguishing it from literary criticism. These are the two that are often confused with one another. Literary criticism is really sort of engaging what is in the text itself, looking for things like repetitions, parallelisms, any literary features of the text, and making comments on what is in the text itself. New Testament textual criticism, on the other hand, is thinking more about the container of the text, thinking about the manuscripts, and thinking what forms the text come to us in. So it's whereas literary criticism might be thought of as looking at what is in there, what is part of the literature of the text. Textual criticism is looking a little bit more broadly at what form the text comes to us in. So when we think about definitions of textual criticism, there's been a turn in the last 20 or so years to thinking about textual criticisms in different kinds of ways. So I'm going to give you two different definitions of textual criticism. One represents sort of the classical way of thinking about textual criticism, and this is from J. Harold Greenlee. He writes, "Textual criticism is the study of copies of any written work of which the autograph, that is the first written text, is unknown, with the purpose of ascertaining the original text." So here in Greenlee's definition, we should point out that in the case of all of the New Testament texts, we do not have any originals or autographs. So we are, under Greenlee's definition, engaging textual criticism because the original text is unknown, and the goal is to ascertain or recover the original text, which we no longer have. The sort of turn in textual criticism might be represented by D.C. Parker's definition here, and he certainly would be a scholar who is in the camp that sort of firmly places itself, or Parker would place himself in this sort of turn in how we think of textual criticism. So Parker defines textual criticism as the analysis of variant readings, that is, different kinds of readings, in order to determine in what sequence they arose. So as you look at and compare these two definitions, what do you see that is different about them? That's exactly right. The second one doesn't concern itself with the original text. The goal of textual criticism in the second definition is not to recover that first original text. Those who sort of ascribe to this newer version of textual criticism, or this turn in textual criticism, would say the idea that we'll ever be able to get back to an original text is a sort of misguided endeavor, and we do better to take what we have, look at the manuscripts we have, and figure out what order they came in, and think about what, when we have different readings, which readings caused the other kinds of readings. So our difference between these two definitions is at the bottom here. The purpose of ascertaining the original text is a sort of classical way of doing textual criticism, and still many scholars do that to this day. That is their sort of mode of doing textual criticism. The second definition is more about comparing manuscripts with one another and thinking about why different readings are meaningful in different ways and how they arose from one another. So to get out a number of terms, I've already thrown out some of these terms at you in this definition in my brief explanation of what textual criticism is, but I want to make sure that you have sort of in concrete form a place you can go to have definitions of specific terms that get thrown a lot in textual criticism. So when we're talking about a text, we are talking about the book of the New Testament, or of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, such as Deuteronomy, Romans, Revelation, or even something like Hamlet when one is doing Shakespearean textual criticism. So a text is not one particular version of the text, one particular instantiation of it. That is a manuscript. A manuscript is a single document containing one or more written text. So one manuscript can contain, for example, all of Paul's letters or all of the Gospels, and in some remarkable cases, the entirety of the Bible. So a text is the work itself, whereas a manuscript is a particular version of the work in a document. A textual problem is any case where there is different readings between the different manuscripts, where one manuscript says one thing, another manuscript says another thing. That poses a problem insofar as they are different from one another. And then when we talk about a textual variant, that refers to what is in each particular manuscript. So whereas a problem is concerned with all of the possibilities, all of the different readings, or all of the different variants, a variant is concerned with one particular reading, the representative reading in a particular manuscript. Autograph comes from the Greek words autos and graphe, self-writing. So an autograph is the manuscript as it was first written by the author. So when you see someone refer to an autograph, it means the version that was first penned by the author themselves. And then the apparatus is at the bottom of your Greek New Testament, and it's a place that explains the different manuscripts that attest to variant readings in the Greek New Testament. So it sort of explains which manuscripts align with different readings. And one of our major tasks in this video and for this week is to give you the skill sets to be able to read that apparatus and be able to sort of weigh the different evidence of manuscripts for particular variants in a textual problem. So to take a sort of step back to the actual materials we are talking about when we are talking about manuscripts that contain texts, there are two main materials that you should be aware of. The first is papyrus, and the second is parchment, or also called vellum. So papyrus is made from the papyrus plant, and it was a very common writing material, particularly in Egypt, because the papyrus plant comes from Egypt before the 4th century CE. So most of our important New Testament manuscripts that are early, that is before the 4th century CE, are on papyrus. So in this way, sort of papyrus evidence or papyrus manuscripts become really important because they tend to be older when it comes to New Testament texts. Parchment and vellum is made from animal skins. It's the second picture right here where we have the stretched out skin, which is a little bit more of a durable material. And parchment and vellum became much more common for New Testament texts after the 4th century CE, and it was 4th century, CE, and is sort of in a way, a more highfalutin form of the text. And then a book roll and a codex are two other terms. These are not necessarily materials, but these are containers for texts that you should be aware of. So a book roll, when you hear someone say roll or book roll, think something like a scroll, a text that is rolled up, and book rolls and rolls, especially outside of Christian circles until about the 3rd or 4th century CE, were the common form, the common medium for literary text. That if one came across a literary text in a codex in the 2nd century, that would be a little bit odd. It was maybe a little bit less odd for Christians, and it wasn't odd for sort of everyday writing materials, but for a literary text, what we might call a book, these were standardly put into book rolls. And we see a shift in the sort of prominence of the book roll being the standard medium for literary text in the 4th century, when the codex sort of, we have a turn and the codex starts to be the standard medium in which literary texts are put into and passed along, and probably under Christian influence in some form or fashion. So a codex is going to be what we think of as a modern book, bound at the sides, which you look from left to right with pages on both sides, and again becomes very prominent after the 2nd or 3rd century CE. One of the interesting sort of aspects of Christian book history is that Christians seem to have preferred the codex earlier for their texts that were scripture than did the culture at large, so that we find many New Testament manuscripts from the 3rd and 4th centuries in codices before the culture at large seems to have adopted the codex as the standard medium for literary texts. And then when we're looking into texts themselves, you'll see 2 different terms thrown around for the kind of hand or handwriting that we find in a text. The first is uncial or majuscule. So majuscule meaning sort of large, and minuscule meaning small. When we're talking about uncials or majuscules, we're talking about texts that are written in large capital letters that are not connected to one another. That is, the letters are not written in a sort of cursive script. They're standalone letters, but the words then are written in one long string, so that there are not spaces between words in these uncial or majuscule manuscripts. And typically speaking, something that is written in a uncial or majuscule hand is thought to be literary, that it is a sort of, again, a highfalutin text. Whereas, oh, and here I give you an example. This is from Codex Sinaiticus, a really, really impressive and really beautiful 4th century codex that contains a whole lot of material. But you can see here, this is just to sort of give you a sense of the large letters that are disconnected from one another, but that the words run together. When it comes to minuscules, we're talking about a smaller cursive hand wherein the letters are connected to one another, and is sort of before the 10th century CE is associated with non-literary texts. So sort of workaday writing or sort of business writing might be in minuscule. In a minuscule hand. There are also many New Testament texts that are in minuscule hands, but they are sort of not the really nice deluxe versions of a text. And that begins to change actually after the 10th century, wherein minuscules start to become associated with literary texts. And here I give you a sense of what a minuscule might look like, where you can see that the letters are sort of connected to one another, and you do actually have some more spacing between individual words. So you don't have what is called scriptio continua, where the words run together. All right, and now we're moving into sort of the practical part of this video, and you'll get a little practice actually reading the apparatus. I will read the apparatus with you, and then you will do this on your own as part of the class. But I want to give you a sense of when you are looking at your apparatus. That is to say, when you're looking at the bottom of either your Reader's Edition of the Greek New Testament or the United Bible Society's version of the Greek New Testament. This is what you see when you come to the bottom of a page that's going to explain different textual problems and the manuscripts that support different variants or different readings. So we have different categories of New Testament manuscripts, and I've sort of put them from top to bottom in the order of, generally speaking, greatest importance to lesser importance, or those that are given more weight in thinking about a textual problem, and those that are given less weight. So the first is going to be papyrus manuscripts, and the sort of most important ones, generally speaking, when it comes to New Testament texts are going to be P45, P46, and P47. This is a group of what is called the Chester Beatty papyri. They're called the Chester Beatty papyri because they were acquired by a man named Chester Beatty, and they're now housed in Scotland. But these are all, when it comes to when it comes to manuscripts, these are all early manuscripts. They're all what we would call early attestations to different kinds of New Testament texts. And so each one of these, P45, P46, P47, contains different New Testament texts. These don't contain the entirety of the New Testament. They contain parts, each one contains different parts of these, but the Gospels, Acts, Paul, and Revelation are all attested in one or more of these different papyrus texts. And here I give you an example of P46. This is Romans 6:5, just so you can get a sense of what we are talking about when we're talking about a papyrus. And you'll notice here in the image that it's very fragmentary, that much of it is sort of broken off, so that we have enough material to determine exactly where it's from, but parts of the text are missing. So it's not valuable for sort of all of the New Testament or all of even Romans 6 there, but for reconstructing certain parts of Romans 6 as it existed in this particular papyrus in the 3rd century. Excuse me here. So then next, and I'm sorry that this is somewhat zoomed out so it's large, but we're going to be talking about here this whole category of uncials. Remember those large capital letters. Usually, I would say actually all of these are sort of deluxe editions of the Bible, all of them coming from the 4th century or later, when Christianity is starting to sort of be the preferred religion of the Roman Empire. And these are going to be some of the most important texts when you're looking to your apparatus, and they're going to be the ones that you see most commonly because they contain so much material of the New Testament. So again, I've sort of listed them in order of importance. All of them, I would say, are very important for textual criticism of the New Testament, but I've sort of ordered them of how they're generally weighted in New Testament textual criticism. So the first is represented by a Hebrew aleph here, or by the number 01. So anytime if you see in your apparatus a 0 before a number, that means it's a uncial. It's one of these texts written in large capital letters. This is from the 4th century CE. It contains the entire Bible and then some. So it has all of the Septuagint, and then the Greek New Testament, and then some other additional texts like portions of the Shepherd of Hermas. And I give you an image here of codexsinaiticus.org, where you can go and you can actually sort of look at these at the entirety of this manuscript, and you can zoom in on particular things. And so what I want to do really quickly is actually show you this website, and I encourage you to pause the lecture and go check it out, because it's just really a sort of a really neat resource. So when I go over here, I apologize, this is a little bit small, but you can see, and I'm going to look over here because I have it on this screen over here. You can see that you get on the right side, you get the Greek text given to you that corresponds to the different columns in the manuscript, and you can click on particular words, and it will show you exactly where that word is in the manuscript. It will sort of highlight it for you. You also get down here the English translation of the text. And what's really sort of cool is that you can then zoom in on the text by clicking this little zoom button, and then just clicking 2 times, and you can just keep going in further and further for these to see the high resolution imaging, which is just really sort of remarkable. And then again, you can go back and get a sense of what words appear where. So this is the beginning of Revelation. We have the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, which he gave to him, God, which God gave to him. So it's just so that you're sort of aware of that resource. There's other websites like this. There's one for Codex Vaticanus, and then there's another site which you saw on an earlier image, the Center for New Testament Manuscripts. I think it's the Let's go back and find it really quick. csntm.org is going to contain a number of different manuscripts, including a lot of these papyri. So these are places where you can go to actually look at the texts or the manuscripts that we are talking about, so that you sort of have an idea of what it is exactly you are reading about when you look at the apparatus for these different symbols, so that you could actually go, if you see these symbols, you could go and look at what the text actually looks like in Sinaiticus. So then our other texts here, we have Alexandrinus from the 5th century labeled with A, Vaticanus labeled with B, also from the 4th century, containing most of the Bible. And I want to show you here the ending of Mark from Vaticanus. So if you remember, the Mark famously ends on a sort of a cliffhanger. The women at Jesus' tomb don't say anything to anyone, for they were afraid. And then later, authors went back and sort of supplemented Mark's ending. And in Vaticanus here, what's really interesting is you can see that the Vaticanus on each page has 3 columns, and has actually left this column, this far right column here, empty. And it's interesting that this is empty, insofar as this is not normally what Vaticanus does. Normally, when a book ends, it will just start the next book in the next column. So we would sort of expect Luke, to begin right here, but it doesn't. And so some have supposed that Vaticanus knows that there are other endings to Mark, and has sort of left this space blank in case someone wanted to add verses 9 through 20 back in there. And then we can go sort of zoom in here on the ending, you can see the Mark, remember, ends with the word for, or gar, or therefore. And you can see that in Greek here. We have e phobunta, they were afraid, for, gar, and then kata markein, the title of the gospel there. And then we have Codex Bezae from the 6th century, and Washingtoninus from the 4th or 5th century, which only contains the gospels. So this one is really only relevant when you're doing New Testament textual criticism of the gospels. There's a couple other symbols that you should be familiar with. And I should also note at this point that in the reading from this week that I've given you from Blomberg, he gives you sort of a table that lists these different symbols. And you can also find them at the beginning of your Greek New Testament, that it will tell you what the symbol means, and then the date of the manuscript that is associated with it. So a lot of what we're doing, and we'll talk about this in the next video, when we're doing New Testament textual criticism, is in a way sort of cross-referencing from different tools, figuring out what manuscript it is we're talking about, when it dates to. So again, any manuscript that has a 0 before it is going to be a uncial. Numbers in the apparatus that are not preceded are going to be minuscule manuscripts, written in that small cursive hand. And you'll also see the minuscules also designated with F, and then with a number, a small number up above it. And this refers to a family of minuscules. That is to say, a group of minuscules that all really look like one another. They look like they have some kind of relationship, a copying relationship to one another. BYZ refers to the majority of Byzantine manuscripts, so those dating mostly from the 10th century and later. So if you see this symbol, it means that most of these texts from the 10th century and later have that particular variant reading. Lect, or an italicized lowercase l, means lectionary readings, wherein we have sort of the text just listed out in sort of an ancient lectionary form, just as we might in a modern lectionary. And then an italicized lowercase letters refers to different Latin manuscripts. And then we have these referring to different versions of the Vulgate that are revised from Latin to match Greek. So these are all, not all, but the most important symbols to know when you go to read your apparatus. I've given you these slides as sort of a reference tool so that you can look to them to figure out what readings are supported by what manuscripts. And again, you have this same information in the Blomberg reading as well as in the front of your Greek New Testament. So one of the things that I would advise you to do, and you can see that I have done it here, is to tab. Let's see if you can see. It's probably backwards in the camera, but what I have is tabs in my UBS for the different kinds of text, for the papyrus, for the uncials, for the minuscules, and so that I can then just turn to those tabs and sort of cross-reference what is where. So that's something I might advise you to do. These are the symbols that are going to be important for you as we move into the next video, getting some practice doing the actual reading of your apparatus in the Greek New Testament.